Welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of When Football Began Again. Thank you for joining me for your weekly slice of Premier League nostalgia. Joining me today to discuss his deserted island matches is Sky Sports journalist Joe Rawson. Joe is an old friend of mine. We used to work at Hallam FM on the sports show with Julian Warren, who's now one of the main men at Sky Sports. So we've known each other for a long time. He's a big Sheffield Wednesday fan. He has followed his career into sports journalism. He works on Soccer Saturday. When we chat, he's at the World Cup. Really fascinating chat, all about his love for Sheffield Wednesday, but also career paths into sports journalism and some of the more interesting things that have happened along the way during his career. So that chat coming up very shortly. If you are watching the show today on YouTube, you will probably get a warm glow exuding from your screen. During this conversation, Joe was on a balcony in Qatar reporting back for Sky from the World Cup. Unfortunately, he didn't quite make the whole run. The less said about that, the better. But really interesting insight into the World Cup and what it's like to be a reporter out there. So Joe gives us an insight into that as well. Do hang around at the end of the show. I have news on next week's guest, which is a really exciting one. I'm really looking forward to welcoming my guest on next week. We will also reveal who the greatest player or players from Antigua and Barbuda from last week's show is. A slight potential spoiler alert there. Listen after this interview to find out more about that. Let's join Joe on his warm balcony in the Persian Gulf. Here is Deserted Island Matches with Joe Rawson. Enjoy. Joining us today to discuss their deserted island matches is journalist, Sky News reporter and Sheffield Wednesday fan Joe Rawson. Joe, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. A little bit warm because I'm sat here on my balcony in Doha and it's December and it's 31 degrees Celsius, which for a northerner is a little bit too warm, I'll be honest.
I mean, I'm sat here in a freezing home studio. You are sat on a balcony in the Persian Gulf. It couldn't be much more poles apart at the moment. But it's looking good out there. Sort of how, I mean, by the time this goes out, the World Cup might be a bit of a distant memory for many. But how is it out there? Just for context, I guess, the group stages are coming to an end. England are through to the knockout stages. People listening to this will know what the future holds. But at this moment, we don't know right now how England get on. How is it out there?
I've really enjoyed my experience here. There's obviously been a lot of criticism aimed at Qatar and FIFA for awarding the tournament to the country. But in terms of the experience for fans since I've arrived, I've not spoken to anyone who's not having a good time. It's a very different World Cup to any other. For one thing, there's not the alcohol available as there usually is at a tournament. And for me, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. There's not been one arrest here. And there's not been any trouble on the streets. It's a family atmosphere. You can go into the bars where you can get a drink and they're a little bit more lively. But again, it's all very controlled, and there's not been any flare-ups, which I think is a good thing. There's a different fan base here, lots of Moroccan, Saudi Arabian, Iran fans, and they are creating the party atmosphere, which, again, it's different to European and South American fans who usually take over the tournament at World Cups. But I think that's a positive. Football is a world game, isn't it? Particularly in this modern era, despite the criticism, and we can have the debate whether Qatar should be holding a World Cup. I do think it's right that a World Cup is being held in this part of the world. Whether it should be in this country or not, that's a different debate. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far. And the fact that England are still in the tournament is also a big positive.
I think I saw on your Instagram stories that you were having a 0% Budweiser last night or the night before at the match.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't great. 0% Budweiser. I don't recommend it to anyone. You may as well just have a Coca-Cola. It is what it is. It's a different culture out here, and I can live without it for a few weeks, and I'm sure most people can. As we're going to speak about, football is about the sport. It's not about going for a sesh. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love going for a sesh more than most. I can live without having a drink when I go to watch football because it's all about watching the game, seeing a good contest and following my team.
Well, we're going to transport you back in time to a time when, maybe needing a beer with the football was more commonplace. Sheffield Wednesday in the late 90s. What are your earliest Sheffield Wednesday memories? How did they become the team for you?
Basically, because a couple of my best mates supported Sheffield Wednesday. My dad was a Chesterfield fan, and I'm from Chesterfield, and my mum was a Liverpool fan. Now, of course, the first ever game I went to watch was Chesterfield, my local side, but Sheffield Wednesday were the nearest team in the Premier League. We had players like David Hurst, Chris Waddle, John Sheridan, top quality players. Wednesday were competing at the top end of the table, and a lot of my friends were Sheffield Wednesday fans. So I kind of followed the crowd, if you like, as you do when you're young, and decided that Sheffield Wednesday were the team for me, and I was obsessed with goalkeeping as a kid. Chris Woods was in the England squad around the time where I sort of got interested in football. So I got all the goalkeeper kits, and then it was Kevin Pressman. And I just became obsessed with Sheffield Wednesday and their goalkeepers at a young age.
Were you a goalie playing as a kid? Is that why? Was that your position?
Yeah, I don't know why I decided that I wanted to be a goalkeeper. I must have been mad. But I was a goalkeeper up until the age of about 13. I used to be pretty good as well. I had spells with Chesterfield and Leicester and Sheffield United, but then being 5'10", it's not really big enough to be a goalkeeper. And there was an age where we moved into 11-a-side goals that I just kept getting lobbed pretty much every game. So that was the end of that, and I decided to become a right back. But I always felt that Wednesday had really good goalkeepers. So, like I mentioned, Chris Woods, Pressman, the late Pavel Schnurchek, and I just really like the goalkeeper kits as well because they were ridiculous in the 90s, sort of jazzy colours. I had a blue and yellow weird-looking one and a red and green one that was similar to the David Seaman Euro 96 red-coloured goalkeeper top. Yeah, I reckon that might have been why I wanted to become a goalkeeper, just because I like the kits.
The 90s kits, especially Sheffield Wednesday's, particularly iconic. So the first match we've asked you to choose is a Premier League game involving Sheffield Wednesday that you're going to take to your deserted island with you to watch forevermore. What have you gone for?
So I've gone for Sheffield Wednesday against Manchester United. This was back in 1998. It was one that I remember because I think it was one of the first that I went to a game with a couple of friends who were Manchester United fans. Went in the Wednesday game. I used to have a season ticket and we managed to get hold of a couple of extra kids' tickets. Manchester United were flying high at the top end of the Premiership as it was there. They had Cole and York playing for them, Roy Keane, and Sheffield Wednesday beat them 3-1. And I can remember it just being an amazing atmosphere, an unexpected performance, because this was sort of when Wednesday were struggling towards the bottom end of the table. Andy Booth and Benito Carboni played really well in that game, and it was just a massive upset. And because I was there with friends who were Manchester United fans, you can imagine the sort of stick that I was giving them throughout the game while they were sat in the Sheffield Wednesday home end, just not moving.
And that is, I mean, most football fans have done that at some point, had to go and sit in the opposite end from the team they're supporting, which is absolutely horrendous. It probably, if there's anything, it's probably easier if your team's getting rattled. I mean, it's probably worse when you've got to sit on your hands while your team runs away with it. So at least they probably had less chance of being found out, apart from being the only two Sheffield Wednesday fans looking miserable.
Yeah, I mean, when Nicholas Alexanderson got his brace and they just sat there not doing anything as kids, where you're in a family stand full of screaming kids who can't believe that Sheffield Wednesday are winning, I'm sure there was something fishy, but, because we're in the family stand, it was all okay. But you can imagine the sort of next week in the playground, the amount of stick. Uh, yeah, that's why it just sticks out in my mind. I'd have only been 10, so it's one of my earliest memories of football, I guess. But yeah, just to have that one over my mates, that was amazing for me back then, particularly as it was Manchester United and they won everything. So, for Wednesday to beat Manchester United was such a big result.
That was the side that went on and won the treble later that season, of course. So yeah, Benito Carboni and Andy Booth up front. And Sheffield Wednesday were, of course, one of the founding members of the Premier League. I know that's a little bit outside of your sort of living memory. They were losing finalists in both cup finals in 1993. They finished 7th 3 times in those first 6 seasons. Kind of glory days compared to what will follow in the next quarter century. Did you ever sort of find yourself going back to relive those kind of the Premier League years, programs and things as a kid? Did you have like videos of those teams and those kind of cup finals, a relatively successful side?
Certainly, as I've got older, I'm not sure as a kid, I think you're there in the here and now. But when I got into my teens and got older, yeah, I read a couple of autobiographies of ex-Sheffield Wednesday players, and of course watching the Premier League years on Sky, and just educating myself that actually we were a good side at one point, because I've not really seen much success. John Sheridan, who I'm lucky enough to have worked quite closely with as a journalist during my days covering Chesterfield, but I didn't really realise how good of a player he was. And actually watching old videos of him, I would put him right up there with, some of the greatest midfielders that have ever played the game in my mind. He was absolutely fantastic, could do everything. Not a player who I was... Look, I might have caught him in the flesh, but I certainly can't remember it if I did. Watching the old videos back, yeah, he was fantastic. Chris Waddle as well, in his heyday. What a player. Again, he could do everything. Even going further back into the histories, Wednesday just had some world-class players at times, which unfortunately I've not been lucky enough to see sort of during my supporting days, because we've generally gone downhill.
The second match for your deserted island is a non-Premier League Wednesday game. So any game that Wednesday have played in that's outside of the top flight, what have you gone for?
Well, of course, it has to be the Steel City Derby, and one of the Steel City Derbies that Wednesday won. Now, both of my two younger brothers are Sheffield United fans, if you can believe that. So wow. The rivalry in our house is incredible when it comes round to these matches. One's 2 years younger than me. The other one is 5 years younger than me. Why they are Sheffield United fans, God only knows, because the one that's 2 years younger had a season ticket with us and came to watch Sheffield Wednesday. But I think it was just because most of his friends were Sheffield United fans, and again, following the old playground sort of thing. And then the youngest brother is closer to Mark than he is to me. And so he just followed in Mark's footsteps, which is pretty sad, I think. But yeah, so and I this one sticks in my mind in particular because of Lloyd Owusu scoring, and then doing this sort of celebration where we all go Owusu, Owusu, Owusu. And my brothers were both at Hillsborough in the away end at Leppings Lane at the time, and I was in the main stand, and it sticks in my mind because of the banter with them going into the ground, and then you can imagine the banter coming out. 2-0 win. No, don't think it was a fantastic game or a great performance by Sheffield Wednesday, but Lloyd Owusu scoring in the second half, and then Shefki Kuki as well, completing the victory for Sheffield Wednesday. And it was a good Sheffield United side at the time as well. They had the likes of Phil Jagielka, Paddy Kenny playing for them. I think they were doing slightly better in the league than Wednesday. But yeah, just one that sticks in my mind because I was there with my family. They're Sheffield United fans.
I was looking at the lineups actually for this game, and obviously this is there's a couple of seasons outside the Premier League era, but looking at the lineups, I mean Kevin Pressman is still the mainstay in the Wednesday goal. I mean we've already talked about your kind of how much you like Wednesday goalkeepers. Where does Kevin Pressman rank for you as a club legend, I guess, and sticking with the club after relegation?
Yeah, right up there for me. And again, he is from Chesterfield, so I've been lucky enough to meet him on numerous occasions, and I played football with his son Tom, who was also a goalkeeper. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but he probably should have got an England cap. He got an England B international cap, or maybe a couple of those, but I think he was a bit of an underrated Premier League goalkeeper, Kevin Pressman, and certainly when we were in what is now the Championship, Division 1, he was great for us. He's sort of the player that probably made me want to try and be a goalkeeper, unsuccessfully in the end. I've met him on numerous occasions since he's retired, during his time as a Millwall coach, and he's just a great guy, quite quiet, but a top bloke, and I thought a top goalkeeper who, maybe if he'd have gone from Sheffield Wednesday, actually could have gone further up in the game.
Your first real season supporting the Owls was an eventful one, with Danny Wilson joining from Barnsley, guiding you to a comfortable 12th. It's perhaps best remembered, though, for Paulo Di Canio's push on Paul Alcock. Do you remember that match? Were you in the ground that day? What do you remember about that entire incident?
Yeah, I do remember it, and I did go to the game, and Sheffield Wednesday actually won it, which I can't think people don't remember. And that was a great Arsenal team as well under Arsene Wenger. I think most of the side that were part of the Invincibles played on that afternoon. So I can remember it being a good win for Sheffield Wednesday, but obviously the Di Canio push was just shocking. I know it because I've seen replays and numerous TV stuff on it, and I've read Di Canio's input on it. But actually, at the game, I can't really remember looking at the put. I just remember the referee falling backwards and then being on the ground, and then Di Canio and Martin Keown were both red carded in sort of a matter of seconds. But it's just astonishing when you look back at it. The referee obviously doesn't help himself because he goes down in slow motion, Paul Alcock. But Di Canio was such a hero of mine at the time. I think it hit me that he wouldn't play for Sheffield Wednesday again after that incident. And him and Carboni were what got us towards the top end of the table in that first season under Danny Wilson. They both wore white boots. That sticks in my mind because I wanted a pair of white boots. And it just an unbelievable incident. It's one that will be talked about forever because it's never happened before, never happened again in the Premier League. And then it sort of transformed Di Canio's career as well, I think, because it was only a couple of years later that he picked up the Fair Play Award from the Premier League when he picked out the ball, caught it, didn't he, while playing for West Ham when a cross was played in when there was a player down. Yeah, a bizarre incident. Again, I think I was only 10, 11, so my understanding of what had happened, probably not all there, but at least I can say I was in there for that iconic moment. And yeah, but it's more about that victory over Arsenal that I tend to remember.
It happened, I think, quite early in the first half as well. It's an unforgettable moment. The third game we're going to give you on VHS for your deserted island is any Premier League game that doesn't feature Sheffield Wednesday. Which Premier League classic would you watch again and again?
So I've selected Manchester United against Manchester City and the 4-3 win for Manchester United. Now, I'm not a great lover of either of these two clubs, but I've always been a fan of Michael Owen. And I think because of that iconic goal he scored for England against Argentina, again, one of my first memories of watching England at a World Cup. And just what a goal that was, right up there. He had a few injuries, and obviously his career was going the wrong direction. And Sir Alex Ferguson saw something in him and brought him to Manchester United as a goal scorer. And this was when City were becoming real challenges to Manchester United. I think they just got Carlos Tevez, for instance. They were splashing big cash. Owen came off the bench and scored with almost the last kick of the game for one of his first games for Manchester United. It just sticks in my mind. Drama. The game was end to end. I think Ben Foster was making a rare start for Manchester United, and he made an error, and that was sort of the end of his United career. But Owen, that iconic moment, that late moment, will always stick in my mind. And I can remember just as a neutral watching the game in the pub and going, "Oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is why I love football," and that's why I take it with me.
It is one of those matches, isn't it? I was looking back at that one, and that one was really, really clear in my mind as well. And United, I think, led 3 times, got pegged back 3 times. Craig Bellamy had actually equalised in the last minute for City, so it looked, because they'd got a 100% record going into that game. It was quite early on in the season. And then that I think is it Ryan Giggs? Ryan Giggs was playing a central position, puts the ball through for Owen. I mean, Giggs was just coming towards the end of the peak of his powers and moving into a little bit more of a central position where he played quite a bit for Man United in those later years, wasn't it? A lot of people had said that Owen was past it and that his legs had gone and that he could no longer play at the top level. But as you say, Fergie maybe saw something in him, and that goal, I can't remember too many more goals in a Man United shirt for Michael Owen, but that one will be remembered for a long time.
Yeah, and almost the last great Manchester United team when you look at what's happened to United since. I think they went on to win the title that year or maybe the following year, and then obviously Alex Ferguson stepped down, and they've never been the same since, have they? Will they get back to where they were under Erik ten Hag? We'll wait and see. But yeah, that was sort of the last hurrah for that group of Manchester United players, and it's just one of those games that I just remember clearly because it was such a great game of football, end to end, and plenty of goals. And I didn't want to go for the Aguero moment because I'm sure that's what everyone says, and so this is a little bit different.
That one is quite popular, but that's a similarly iconic goal. Okay, so your second season supporting Wednesday is a little bit less enjoyable. You spend the first half of the season bottom, the entire season in the relegation zone. There's an 8-0 defeat at St James's Park to contend with as well, before ultimately relegation to what was then Division 1. Were you one of those kids that they kind of show a match of the day in tears being embraced, or was it a foregone conclusion that season that Wednesday were going down?
I think I realised that Sheffield Wednesday were going down. Obviously, Danny Wilson got sacked. We ended up bringing Peter Shreves in, and it was just a dreadful season. And I was sort of working out whether I wanted to continue being a Sheffield Wednesday fan, I think, with how bad we were. Gerald Sibon and Giles de Bilder were the 2 main strikers in the squad and didn't do an awful lot. Very, very underwhelming in terms of what we expected. And I actually had a shirt that season that said Giles de Bilder on the back, and I was incredibly disappointed with how bad he turned out to be as a player. So I wish I'd have realised that it would have been such a long time, that we'd be back in the top flight, and maybe the last time that I ever see Sheffield Wednesday play in the top flight. I wasn't aware of what was going on, things off the pitch and the troubles financially. We kind of knew we were down from sort of the early parts of that season. We were just so bad. So there were no tears. There might have been if I'd have known that we weren't going to come back up the next season, which I think was the thought in my mind. Not a great time to be a Sheffield Wednesday fan.
I like the idea of you having Gilles de Bilde's name on the back of your shirt. I remember when Moussa Sissoko was going through a really barren spell at Spurs, the crowd were on his back, and I saw an 8-9-year-old kid with Sissoko on the back of his shirt, and I just thought that is character building. Of all the players you could choose, it's maybe the first kind of childlike experience of slight embarrassment. Going, oh, actually, this player on the back of my shirt maybe isn't the superstar I thought he was.
Yeah, but I think actually you could have had any Sheffield Wednesday player in that team on the back of the shirt, and it would have been embarrassing because just no one performed that season. But the builder was the big money signing and lots of expectation on him. But, I can remember there were kids that had Simon Donnelly and Phil O'Donnell on the back of their shirt, and they were two of the worst signings Sheffield Wednesday have ever made in terms of flops. So just shows you big money signings don't always work out, and I'm not sure what was going on with our scouting system at the time.
So I was chatting to Danny Wilson, obviously, who was manager at the time, and spoke about losing Di Canio for obvious reasons, and losing him really at a cut price. So not only was kind of the best player of his team suspended for a long time, ripped out from his squad, he also didn't kind of get the money then to reinvest back into the squad for a player who was probably worth 5 million easy at that time, market value, and he went, I think, for less than $1 million to West Ham. So that must have had a real impact in terms of his ability to improve that squad.
At the time, I didn't realise what was going on off the pitch because you have the naivety of a child. But when you look back at it now and you educate yourself, there were quite a few financial issues going on behind the scenes with Dave Allen, who was the chairman and owner at the time, wanting to tighten the purse strings. It was all going Pete Tong off the field, and I kind of feel a little bit for Danny Wilson, having read about the situation he was put into. I mean, he was kind of relying on Andy Booth to be the main striker, which, he wasn't a bad player, but a top Premiership player, I'm not so sure. And then bringing in Gerald Sibon and Giles de Bilder from the Dutch leagues, they were both disasters, even though Sibon is seen as a bit of a cult hero because when we went down, he did score some cracking goals in the Championship for Wednesday. He was bought as a Premier League player from Ajax. He really should have done a lot better than he did. And yeah, it's all been fairly miserable since then.
Well, we'll move on from Wednesday for a minute. The fourth game I want you to pick is a European club tie that you take with you. Which European classic have you gone for?
I've gone for Manchester United against Bayern Munich, and I promise people I'm not a Manchester United fan because this is the second Manchester United game that I've picked. But yeah, I have such clear memories of this match. I was on holiday in Salou, which isn't too far from Barcelona where the game was taking place, on a family holiday, and there was some family friends who were over there at the same time, and the dad of that group was a Manchester United fan, and he managed to get tickets and went to the game in the new camp. We watched it in a British bar that was situated right next door to a German bar. So that's why it really sticks in my memory, because the British bar was full of Manchester United fans and generally just football fans, because I think whoever that club would have been, it was at a time, I guess even now, England want to get one over the Germans, and the atmosphere was very wild throughout the night in the German bar and a bit subdued in the British bar, because it was right up until the 90th minute that Manchester United staged that incredible comeback with Solskjaer and Sheringham getting the goals. And then just the contrast, it was the polar opposite. It was like the British bar in elation and the German bar just stunned silence. There wasn't even anger. There wasn't drinks being thrown or anything like that. It was literally just stunned silence. I've never been anywhere that I've seen that before. And, I don't think we'll ever see a sort of comeback like that ever again. It was just ridiculous. And, it secured Manchester United the treble, didn't it, that season as well, which is a remarkable achievement. And what what drama. I guess that's why it sticks in the mind. It's just a ridiculous game, a ridiculous end to a game of football.
It was incredible. I'm far from a Manchester United fan as well, and I remember it lifting me off my seat just because it was just so dramatic. And again, I think it comes back to that thing of when we talk about football, of just how incredible football is, and just the drama of it. I wanted to speak to you as a broadcaster about this, really, because I know you've done some commentaries as well, and you commentate as part of your role. Clive Tildesley was on comms for ITV that night. Obviously, he was famed for kind of really talking about that night in Barcelona for quite a few years later. But the commentary is incredible. I think his commentary for Solskjaer's, you have to feel this is their year. Is this their moment? Beckham into Sheringham, and Solskjaer has won it. Manchester United have reached the promised land. Ole Solskjaer, the 2 substitutes have scored, the 2 goals in stoppage time, and the treble looms large. He actually says when they equalise in the 90th minute, Giggs with the shot, Sheringham, name on the trophy, Teddy Sheringham with 30 seconds of added time played. He actually predicts that Manchester United are going to win the Champions League at 1-1. Now, speaking as a broadcaster, is that luck? Is that sense? Obviously, that is a massively dramatic moment. And is that the kind of thing that you live for as a broadcaster? Or is it the kind of thing that keeps you up at night to go, oh my God, when that moment comes, it's all on me?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you reading those quotes out gives you goosebumps a little bit, because it is such a fantastic, iconic bit of commentary, and that's why Clive Tildesley is one of the best in the business still, and had such a fantastic career. I always think about those moments and just getting them right, and it is all instinct though, because you can do a lot of planning, and there are commentators that will do pre-prepared lines. So if a goal, they'll have a particular player in mind and write something that sounds really great and really clever. I don't do that. I just try and let the moment take me, which, sometimes that can be the wrong way to go about it, because you don't always get the right words out. You know what you want to say, but that isn't always the way that it comes out. But I guess that separates the real top broadcasters that Clive Tildesley is. But yeah, you do live for those moments. I mean, there's nothing worse than broadcasting and commentating on a boring 0-0 and a Champions League final like that. Yeah, Clive Tildesley will go down in history for that moment. There's numerous, isn't there? That they think it's all over. That's the key line everyone remembers from 1966. The Aguero moment that Martin Tyler pulled out and then said, "You'll never see anything like this again in your lives." But all those won't have been pre-prepared. It's just experienced, fantastic commentators who are living the moment. Obviously, a little bit of luck for Clive predicting that, but I think you could sense it, even where I was sat in Barcelona, the Manchester United in Salou, just down the road from Barcelona, that United were going to go on to win that, because they're just the momentum. And I saw it in the bar next to me. The German fans were like the Bayern Munich players. The heads had gone. They had the oxygen sucked out of their bodies. And I think Clive sensed that, and I reckon he probably thought he would go to extra time, because I don't think anyone saw Manchester United getting a second goal in injury time. But yeah, what a moment, what a great call from Clive, and he'll go down in history for that alongside the result.
Yeah, and who can forget Sami Kufur kind of thumping the floor in frustration. Incredible game. So back to Sheffield Wednesday. Now, they always felt like one of those Premier League teams on loan when they did go down. Like Man City did, Leeds did. It always felt like you'd be back before too long, and you've kind of touched upon that. Instead, and much like those two teams, you dropped into the third tier. Attendance has dropped considerably as well during that time. Is it fair to say that supporting Wednesday in the early 2000s was, shall we say, character building?
Yes, definitely, because there's some huge contrasts to going to watch star players in the Premiership, Premier League every week, to being down in League One and going away to Hartlepool, which is, one of my first real memories of an away trip to a ground of that standard. But yeah, it was character building, and of course, it's more difficult to watch your side in terms of if you don't go to the games, there's not the coverage there is in the Premier, no match of the day. And I guess the early days of sort of the internet being around, I'm sure we were still on dial-up in the 2000s. So, you didn't get the highlights that you get these days. You can just log on and watch what's full highlights. You can find most games, can't you, streaming these days? So, yeah, I found that difficult. And most of the time I was just sat in front of a radio listening to commentary sort of that way. And the games, yeah, they just weren't as exciting. And the fact that Wednesday continued to get poor results, particularly a couple of seasons from dropping out of the Premier League, we were relegated down to Division 2 as it was at the time. It was difficult, but you choose your club, you stick with them through thick and thin. And there was some good moments, when we won the playoff final against Hartlepool at the Millennium Stadium. That was fantastic, and I went to that match, and that memory will stick in my mind for a long time. I was also at the playoff final when we lost to Hull City not too long ago under Carlos Carvajal in the Championship. That was a big downer, but again, a great day out at Wembley. We won promotion, pipping Sheffield United actually to go up. We had Gary Medine banging in the goals for us. So there has been some good moments, but it's difficult when you're such a big established club like Sheffield Wednesday, and even now, still average over 22,000 week in, week out, and they're in League One. But they're not the only club in that situation. You mentioned sort of Leeds, who are back in the Premier League now, Sunderland, who beat us in the playoff final last season. Even now, we've got Ipswich, Portsmouth in our division, huge clubs. So it just shows you mismanagement off the field. It takes a lot of time to recover from, but fingers crossed, Wednesday will get back to the promised land at some point. Though it gets more and more difficult. I know this now, covering the sport in depth, that the gulf between the top teams and the teams in the Championship and below now, it just grows greater every year, and it's going to be difficult for Sheffield Wednesday to ever get back to the Premier League without having even more significant investment than what they've currently got at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a long way back, and doesn't help that obviously more than half of the 92 now have been in the Premier League at some point as well. So there is that there's so many big sides, as you say, dropping into the third tier, and Oldham dropping out of the Football League altogether.
Yeah, that's it. Even below the third tier. I mean, during my time as a journalist, and obviously working in the Yorkshire area, Leeds were a club I covered for a few years, and obviously they're back now, but such a huge club that were out for such a long time. And even Bradford, they get a similar attendance to Sheffield Wednesday week in, week out, and they're down in League Two. They've got Mark Hughes, a Premier League legend, as their manager. But that's a long way back for a club like Bradford. Portsmouth, as I mentioned, they nearly went out of business. Ipswich, European Cup winners, and they're in League One. When you talk about Premiership years, there's so many of those clubs that are now struggling and in a lot worse position than Sheffield Wednesday.
So the fifth match to take with you is an international game you'd relive forever. What international classic have you gone for?
England 5, Germany 1. But of course, it's the Steven Gerrard strike from the edge of the D that sticks in my mind. The Michael Owen goal after being set up by Emil Heskey. And I can remember just dancing around the living room thinking, wow, this is unbelievable. In the Germans' backyard. What a result for us. And it was a game we needed to win as well to get qualification out of I think it was European or World Cup group. I can't quite remember, but
I think it was for World Cup '02, wasn't it? Because actually, this was the campaign that we still actually needed the Beckham Greece free kick. That campaign.
yeah,
Germany would won the group, but I think the Germans had beat us. That was Keegan's final game, if I remember correctly. So Germany had won 1-0, and Sven Goran Eriksson, I think his tenure was it was on the edge a little bit at this point, and this was the match that really won it round for him, I think, wasn't it?
yeah, and all that talent that we had as well. And I think this is the one game in my mind that it all clicked. It all came together because this is the golden generation. Out here in Qatar, I've been speaking a lot about golden generations because Belgium have gone out in the group stages, and that's seen as their golden generation. Well, this was England's. I mean, that squad. When you look at it, David Seaman in goal, Sol Campbell, John Terry, Rio Ferdinand, Steven Gerrard, Paul Scholes, Frank Lampard, David Beckham, Michael Owen, fantastic players. And for me, this is that one performance that it all clicked. And there were some fantastic England goals in it as well. For me, the favourite is the Steven Gerrard one that he hit so purely from the edge of the D into the bottom corner. But yeah, I mean, how can you not enjoy that game as an England fan? And that's why I take it with me.
Incredible match, and again another one that will live long in the memory of anyone who watched it. Let's turn to your career now for a minute. You and I actually met as fresh-faced volunteers, getting work experience at Hallam FM on the sports show back in the day. Did you know from quite an early age you wanted to go into sports journalism? Kind of what experience did that give you that you've taken with you to this stage of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be on the radio, whether it was sport or do sort of music. When I was a kid, I used to get the old beatbox out and record radio shows on a tape, and then I'd also record myself commentating on FIFA PlayStation. So it was always something that I wanted to do, and I can remember forcing my brother to be my co-commentator, which he didn't particularly enjoy. So yeah, I always had that goal in my mind, and I think I was about 16, 17 when I started at Hallam because I wasn't able to drive. I used to have to get the bus, train and bus in from Chesterfield. But I did hospital radio around that time, and getting involved with the sports show there with yourself and Julian Warren, who now is one of my colleagues at Sky, really, gave me that buzz, that urge to want to do commentary and reporting. And I got the opportunity to read the classified scores out on an occasion, and got to go to a game and do some like dummy reporting and things like that. So yeah, that was great. But I have to say, then I went through a patch where I wasn't treated that well at that station when it got took over and Jules had left. And I did actually move out of the industry for a year or so, went to college, did media, but then went and worked in a bank. And it was just that realisation that I don't want to do that boring Monday to Friday 9 till 5 job. I want to give this a go. When I went to university, studied journalism, continued to get an awful lot of work experience, worked for free, started working at the BBC as a broadcast assistant. Used to go and commentate for betting websites, so they stream some of the games, did all that sort of stuff. And just kept working hard until this opportunity came at Sky 5 years ago now, actually. And it's. I always say, for anyone that wants to get involved in this industry, you want to become a sports journalist. It takes a bit of a backbone. You've got to keep picking yourself up off the floor, and you've got to be resilient. But like anything in life, if you want to do it enough, and you've got the talent, so you work hard to give yourself that talent, because I believe that you can educate yourself, then you'll get there. But it's not an easy field to break into because it is very oversubscribed. And what I see in my role now as a senior, I manage a team, and I get students come and do work experience with me, or they send me emails saying, can I do work experience? It does often feel that a lot of people believe that they can run before they can walk, and my advice was just take the opportunities that are thrown your way. If you want to be on air, that's fine, but do the stuff behind the scenes. Educate yourself on whether it's TV or writing or digital or radio. Immerse yourself in that role, and opportunities will come your way. But it's just to get that foot in the door. Yeah, an industry like this, it takes time to break it. So stick at it if you can. Things won't come overnight. I don't know anyone. I've got lots of friends in the industry now, some who are really top of the industry, and I don't know anyone who it's happened for them overnight. Laura Woods, for instance, who I know quite well, and a lot of people who will be listening to this will recognise. She started off as a runner, and then was working behind the scenes as a production assistant at Sky, and then actually decided to go freelance and got the opportunities on camera. But there's no one that just goes in and they're on screen. They've all done stuff behind the scenes, or they're on air. And not everyone who I hear from in terms of emails understands that. They believe that they come out of the university and they should be presenting match of the day or whatever. And I'm sorry, I wish that was the case, but it's just not how it works.
No, that's great advice, and I'm sure we've talked about reflecting back on your younger self. I'm pretty sure there may have been periods in these last few weeks where you probably wish you could have gone back in time and said you'll be reporting back from a World Cup one day. So keep at it.
Yeah, exactly. And like I mentioned, I left the industry. I went to work in a bank for 18 months, and it took that working in a bank, and I was 20. Well, so I was like 20 when I went to university to study journalism, because I'd spent that time sort of evaluating what I wanted to do with my life. And for me, that was a real positive. And I have to say, from my journalism course at Leeds, there's not too many people who are still in the industry, because there are a lot of people that decided, that's an industry that I want to go into. It looks nice. But not really realizing the sort of the dedication it takes to break it. And it's not a case of just going to university, getting your degree, and you're going to get a job. It takes an awful lot of work experience and working for free. And it's not well paid, I'll be honest, as well, which is another thing I don't think people particularly realize. Particularly at local level. For instance, my first full-time job was paying like £18,000 a year, which at the age of sort of 24, having just come out of uni, you probably think I could get more working in Morrison's. But that's just the state of the industry, and it obviously pays a little bit better as you work up the pyramid. But you're going to go through hard times in it, but it's worth it in the end. That's what I would say to anyone. And I don't think it's the case for just this industry in particular. It's any industry. If that's what you want to do, then it'll be worth it in the end, and you'll live a happier life because of that. Because work is a huge part of everyday life, and just than getting up every day, going to a job that you don't want to do. So that's what I say when I meet young people who want to ask me about my career. Kind of be a little bit real with them, but I can only speak from what I believe in my experiences.
Yeah, no, great advice. Good life advice. Look at us, older statesmen now, giving advice to the youth. So the sixth
all
match.
These grades, that's why.
The sixth match to take with you is any game from before the Premier League era you go back and watch over and over. What game would you take with you?
So I've gone for the World Cup final in 1966, the only England success. We mentioned it earlier with the commentary. They think it's all over. It is now. Obviously, it wasn't that long ago that it was coming up to the anniversary of this, and they broadcast the match in full, in colour on, I think it might have been Channel 4, or Channel 5, one of the two. Anyway, I sat there, watched it all, and that was the first time that I'd really watched the full match. Obviously, I'd seen the highlights and the goals and the iconic pictures of Bobby Moore being hoisted up by his teammates with the Jules Rimet trophy. But it was actually a really good game. Germany had chances to win it. England came back, and being at Wembley, amazing players, such talent on show. Bobby Charlton, what a player. If people watching and listening have never gone back to revisit Bobby Charlton playing, in his heyday, please do, because if you're a football fan, you'll appreciate it. And it's just the fact that it's England winning a World Cup, something that we've never done again in the men or women's game. And it's just incredible. And so, yeah, of course I would take that match with me.
Well, let's hope by the time this has gone out, there's like another World Cup final that England have been in. But let's not hold our breath too much. So we've already touched upon a little bit about kind of your career and how you've got here. You work for Sky. You can be heard reporting back from Qatar. You can often be heard chatting to Jeff or Jules on a Saturday afternoon on Soccer Saturday. What sort of prep goes into that? Talk us through kind of like the process and getting to the ground. A lot of people think it's glamorous. I imagine if you were at Hartlepool away, it's perhaps not, as we've already covered as well. What does a day like that entail if you're reporting back for Soccer Saturday?
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends what sort of game you go into and whether I'm doing a commentary or Soccer Saturday. For Soccer Saturday, for the reports, I'm not doing a Premier League game often, so I drive myself to, for instance, the last one I did was Peterborough against Burton, so drive myself to Peterborough. Obviously, there's not a plush press area at Peterborough, so you just go into the ground, set up, sit there, make sure the equipment is working. I'll go through the sort of program to pick up any tidbits, and Sky actually send out a stats pack, which is really useful because when it's just goal flashes, I don't need to do too much prep because I know that I'm only going to be on air if there's a goal. So ultimately, for a show like Soccer Saturday, they just want it to be really simple. So they want to know who scored, how the goal went in, and that's it. If you can throw in a stat, it means that you're on air a bit longer and it sounds a little bit better, but you can always find that sort of as and when it happens. Usually have a sandwich, make sure the equipment is working. We use something called an ISDN kit, and then, just watch the game. And then often afterwards, I'll go down and do the post-match interview, which is used on television, and that is just a case of asking a manager about the incidents of the game. So again, pretty simple. A lot of it is all done off the cuff. When I'm doing a commentary, it's obviously very, very different. And I do some commentaries on the red button for the Football League, for instance. Now that is actually done off tube. So it's not done in the ground. It's done at Sky Studios. So you go into a commentator's booth and you sit there with the game in front of you and you talk about you commentate on the game as if you were there. But the amount of prep, particularly when it's just yourself and you haven't got a co-commentator, I probably do sort of 12 hours worth of prep for every game I do. I use stickers. Other commentators use like iPads or maybe a list of players, but I use stickers so I can put them into the lineups, and I'll have the player's name, their age, their appearances, if it's goalkeeper, clean sheets, the goals they've scored, who they used to play for, 2 or 3 stats of each player. And because you don't know who's going to play, you need to do that for every member of the squad. I'll then have a look. If there's a stat pack that I get sent, then that's great. But otherwise, I have to build my own. So I've got access to a number of statistics, databases, and I compile some stats, 2 or 3 pages for each team. You then look at sort of local newspaper articles to find out what the managers have been saying. If in an ideal world, if you've got time, then you can watch back the full pre-match news conferences. And yeah, it's all about research. Some commentators will do some of those pre-prepared lines that we've spoken about. I'll always write an intro for the game. Half of the stuff that I actually prepare, in fact, over half, won't get used. But it's all about preparation for a commentary, which is very different to when you're just doing goal flashes and match updates, because essentially you're just on for 20, 30 seconds and you're just saying what's in front of you. Commentary, you're on air for the full 90 minutes. Radio in particular, you have to continue talking for the whole 90 minutes. You can't just stop. Yeah. So you need stuff to say. So in the first England game against Iran here, there was a 10-minute stoppage when the Iranian goalkeeper ran into his own player. Well, you need stuff to fill that time. And, in particular, I was doing a Chesterfield match where a fan was taken ill and they stopped the game for half hour to land a helicopter on the pitch. Now, obviously, you can talk about what's happening in front of you, but you also need other stuff to talk about for half hour. There was it was working for the local Chesterfield radio station, so there was no other game to cross to. We had no other reporters because it was just Chesterfield. The game started, so any audio that you've got prepared to play out before the game, you can't really use again because it doesn't make sense. If we'd have just put music on, that would have sounded weird. So essentially, I'm there talking with the ex-player who I had with me, who was Jamie Hewitt at the time, and I need notes of what I can talk about. And so, again, that preparation is key. And so, yeah, all very different experiences depending what sort of job I'm doing. But preparation is key. Goal flashes, sometimes you can get away with that, flying off the seat of your pants.
There's only so many times you can ask Jamie Hewitt about his goal in 1997 in the FA Cup semi-final while you're waiting for a helicopter to take off, I imagine.
Yeah, I think I did ask him about that during that stoppage. But yeah, I mean, luckily he's good value, Jamie. It's difficult, and I've been on air at times. We used to do a phone-in on that show when the phones were broken, and my co-commentator had left the building, so it's just me there for an hour, and essentially, what can you talk about? I was kind of just reading through the Sky Sports News website and going through everything that had happened in the day. Yeah, I know, you've got thousands of people. It's not a small station. The station I used to work for was Peak FM, and there was maybe 20, 30,000 people listening. You can't just not say anything. So Joe Rawson reads the BBC Sport website. Listening.
So you've been stuck on your deserted island for a little while. We're going to give you the opportunity to choose a current or former Premier League player to attempt a rescue mission for you. Now, there is a caveat with this. If their mission to rescue you fails, you will probably have to see out your days on the island with them. Who would you go for and why?
So I've gone for James Milner, just as I think he would be. I think he would be the man to make sure it's a successful rescue mission. And if it wasn't successful, I don't think he'd give up, because he's just that sort of player, that sort of man. And actually, I think he's got quite a good sense of humour. So if I did get stuck alongside him, looking at his social media pages, I think it would be quite amusing. I don't think he'd be that annoying, because he's actually quite quiet, and people may see him as boring, but I think that would be fine on a desert island. So James Milner is the man to rescue me.
The ultimate utility man there. He can play in every position and rescue people from marooned islands. Yeah, good choice. Well, let's go back to Sheffield Wednesday to finish. They did reach the Championship playoffs in 2016 and 2017, as we've already mentioned, falling to Hull and Huddersfield. A points deduction later, they are currently back in the third tier for the third time since relegation in 2000. Do you think they'll ever get back to the Premier League? And I think I know the answer to this, but the reason I ask it, do you want them to, or is life outside the Premier League more fun, which some fans testify to? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I get that, and I want them to get back to the Premier League because it's been such a long time since I've seen them in the Premier League, and actually, I'd love to see them playing at that level of football. Now, I'm not a young kid, so I can appreciate it a lot more. But of course, I do cover a lot of Premier League games in my current role, and I speak to a lot of fans of the likes of Southampton, for instance, and a lot of their fans go, "Well, it's just boring. All we're doing is trying to stay up every year, and we're never going to crack the top six, and we're not that great to watch." When we were back down in the Championship and League One under Nigel Adkins, and we got those promotions, that was probably the best football I've ever seen. And I can understand that, because if you're a club like Southampton, that your existence is just to stay in the Premier League. You've not really had a cup run. I know they've been to a couple of finals, but they've not lifted a trophy. I can understand that point of view from any fan of a club similar to that. I'm not just picking out Southampton, but you contrast it to like Brighton fans, who they're a club on the way up and actually play good football. I think they don't care what division they're in. As a Sheffield Wednesday fan, like I say, because it's been such a long time since we've been in the top flight, I just want us to be there just to say I've seen Sheffield Wednesday play in that top division. And we are a big club, and I'd just be interested to see, how far we can go. Obviously, once you've been there for a decade and you're kind of just trying to survive, I might have a different opinion. Will we get there ever again? I hope so. Like I mentioned earlier, the gulf between the top and the bottom just grows ever increasingly greater. I do think Sheffield Wednesday will get promoted this season. We've got such a strong squad for League One. I know that Plymouth are currently top. I don't know. Then hopefully by the time this goes out, Sheffield Wednesday will be top and Plymouth have fallen away. But already it's looking like a three horse race between Plymouth, Ipswich, and us. I just think Sheffield Wednesday's squad depth is greater than Plymouth in particular, and I believe that we'll be able to strengthen it in January as well with funds. But for people listening, watching this who don't know, Barry Bannon, for instance, certainly could play football in the Championship. Joss Windass, Lee Gregory, players that can definitely score goals in League One, probably the division above. And we were very unfortunate to get relegated when a couple of seasons ago, because Derby managed to avoid a points deduction with it coming the season after, and we ultimately went down because we got punished and Derby didn't. Derby now alongside Wednesday in League One. But I certainly do feel that after reaching the playoffs last season under Darren Moore, we've got an incredible home record. It's a rarity to see a defeat at Hillsborough for Sheffield Wednesday these days. That we'll get back to the Championship, and then it's going to take a little more time to rebuild, because the clubs that are coming down from the Premier League at the moment have such riches, and you can see that when you look at the teams who are competing at the top. It's not every club, because obviously you need to get the manager right and the recruitment right. But Burnley, for instance, this season are surely going to go straight back up under Vincent Kompany. Sheffield United are great rivals. This is their second season back in the Championship, but it seems like they've got it right. Norwich, they've been up and down for such a long time. Watford, the way they run their club is just odd, but they do have some great players. I mean, Ismail Assar, who England are going to come up against in the last 16 against when they take on Senegal here in Qatar, he's still at Watford, which is unbelievable. A player of that quality to be in the Championship. So yeah, when we get up to that level, I think it is going to take a bit of time to transition, and you see that with teams that often get promoted. But hopefully one day we can get back to the Premier League. I think our history and the size of the fan base means that it would be great. No one has a God-given right to be there, but just like Nottingham Forest getting back this season, I've really enjoyed them being back in the Premier League after such a long time. Neutral football supporters would welcome a return to Sheffield Wednesday in the top flight.
So I'm going to give you now the chance to delete a game from the history books by taking it to the deserted island with you. It can be a Wednesday game, it can be a match for your rivals, it can be something obscure. Which game would you banish to Room 101 forever, and would it have changed the course of history forever?
Well, I've chosen a Chesterfield versus Sheffield Wednesday game, and I do have a soft spot for Chesterfield because I'm from the town, home club. Spent 3 seasons commentating, presenting their games, but I can remember this one in particular. I think it was the first time that Sheffield Wednesday had visited Saltergate for years. So Chesterfield see both Sheffield clubs as a great rival alongside Mansfield. For Sheffield Wednesday fans, we just think Chesterfield, we'll help them out with a lone player here or there. But they're not a great rival. And Chesterfield beat Sheffield Wednesday 3-1 in this match. I was in the away end, which at the old Saltergate was uncovered. The toilets were just a wall that you went to have a wee up against.
And that's not an exaggeration. People may think that that's an exaggeration. That is not an exaggeration, having been in that end at Saltergate.
No, Google it and have a look. The atmosphere and the way that Chesterfield went off after this victory made me hate the game so much. So after the game, the announcer on the tannoy was going, "This is a great victory for Chesterfield in whatever," and just going off on one. And I'm thinking, you've not won the FA Cup. We were struggling in this season, and you've not won anything. You beat a side who were struggling at the bottom end of League One. All right, we've just got relegated, and we wore this awful cream kit, which again sticks in my mind because it was horrible. We had this awful player called Undumbu Unsungu, who actually got on the score sheet on that day, but that was the only thing he ever did for Sheffield Wednesday. It was just the attitude of the Chesterfield fans that makes me want to eradicate this as a Sheffield Wednesday fan from the history books, because they were just going off like they'd won the World Cup, and in all honesty, they'd beaten a poor Sheffield Wednesday side. And, I'm sure it was a big moment for Chesterfield, but I've been to Chesterfield games that were much bigger and not seen celebrations like that.
I like how you're taking that so you can eradicate the memory of the urinals at the old Saltergate, but also take away the precious memories of many a spy right. So that's a good choice. You can have it with you. Before we finish the show and ask you the final question for your Deserted Island, I want your guidance for a regular feature we do. This is the Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame, and what we do each week, we put a player, the greatest player from every nation that's ever been represented in the Premier League, into a Hall of Fame. You've got a plum draw this week, Joe. Today it's the turn of Belarus. There have been just 2 Belarusians to represent Premier League clubs in the last 3 decades. There's a bit of a gulf in their respective records, I'll be honest, but let's see if it's as clear-cut as it seems. They are Sergei Kornilenko, who made 6 appearances on loan for Blackpool in the 2010-2011 season, where he failed to score. He was part of the Belarus team that appeared in the London Olympics the following year, though, and won 78 caps in total, scoring 17 times, as well as representing Dynamo Minsk, Dynamo Kiev, Dnipro and Zenit St Petersburg. His most prolific spells came at the delightfully named Siberian side, Tomsk, where he scored 17 times in 28 games across 2 spells. Or is it our other Belarusian Premier League candidate, Alexander Hleb, the 80-cap, 6-time Belarusian Player of the Year, an accolade he won every year between 2002 and 2008, except for 2004, when his country's record goal scorer, Maxim Romoshenko, took the honour. Hleb made 89 appearances for Arsenal between 2005 and 2008 before moving to Barcelona, something he later said was his biggest regret. He returned to the Premier League with Birmingham City, scoring once in 19 appearances in 2010-2011. So, Joe, we will put this out on a public vote to see what people think, but who do you think is the greatest Belarusian player ever? Is it Hleb? Is it Kornilenko?
Obviously, it's Kornilenko. No, I'm joking. It's Alexander Hleb. I thought he was fantastic during his time at Arsenal, and he regrets leaving. It didn't work out for him, did it, at Barcelona? But a very entertaining player to watch, a very clever midfield player. I guess in terms of, I've got not got a lot of choice, but at one stage he could be considered as being up there. I don't know whether I want to call him world class, but a class player. The other guy, he couldn't do it for Blackpool. It seems like he got outshone by Charlie Adam, which takes some doing. So, yeah, it's got to be Alexander Hleb.
Okay, well, we've gone for Alexander Hleb, and that seems a pretty solid choice. Finally, we're going to give you a football to take with you for your deserted island and task you with recreating an iconic Premier League goal to see out your days. You've got the rest of time to perfect any Premier League goal with this football. Which Premier League goal are you going to go and relive forever with the palm trees for goalposts?
Again, and I honestly, I had to think about this long and hard because there are some great goals. The one that stuck into my mind was the Wayne Rooney overhead kick, and maybe that is because I am a Sky employee, and it means I watch an awful lot of Sky in the office. It's always on, and they always show a slow motion sort of version of that, and then they put the Sky Sports graphics over it, no matter what channel you're watching. So maybe that's just embedded into my mind, but it would be a heck of a one to try and pull off. I've got to give an honourable mention to Van Persie with the sort of bicycle volley that he smashed in against Charlton. That did come to my mind as well. But yeah, I'm not a Manchester United fan. This is another Man U goal, isn't it? But it's just that Wayne Rooney, the way that he just flew in the air, he just seemed to hang there for ages. It's just such an excellent overhead kick.
And did he shin it? There's often controversy because it is a fantastic, iconic goal. There's controversy of whether it came off his shin. Are you going to perfect it off the shin, or is it going to come clean off your laces?
Well, I don't think it matters if it comes off the shin or foot. As long as it went where he intended it to go. Now, you can say that if someone sort of chests it in or knees it in or whatever, as long as it goes where you intend it to. For me, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, to be honest, if I can get anywhere near that high in the air for an overhead kick, then I've done okay. Struggle to get off my chair these days, Carl.
I can just imagine James Milner crossing the ball in now, and then hopefully he knows a little bit of first aid for one or two of the first heavy landings. Joe Rawson, thank you very much for joining us and for taking time out from Qatar. Obviously, you and I don't know how the tournament ends. The listener does, so let us be the first to say it's definitely coming home. And yeah, where can people sort of find you on socials and stuff? Where are you at?
So I'm just at Joe Rawson on Twitter and the Joe Rawson on Instagram. I hate that name, but Joe Rawson was taken. Joe Rawson 1 was taken. Joe Rawson 2 was taken. I kept going through all the numbers and it wouldn't let me use it as a username. So my missus said, stick the at the start. But, honestly, I'm not that person. I hate being the Joe Rawson. I'm not the Rock. And I don't like to refer to myself in first person.
Ploughing over Joe Rawson's 128, the Joe Rawson on Instagram. Awesome. Brilliant. Well, it's been great chatting to you, mate, and enjoy the rest of your tournament. Let's hope you're out there right till the very end.
Cheers.
So, spoiler alert, Joe was not in Qatar for the duration. I think he lasted another week. The less said about that, the better. I found his tale of having to commentate live on radio for half an hour with no action absolutely terrifying. As comedians, we all share a sort of anxiety dream where you end up thrust into a gig that you didn't know you were doing and have to make people laugh. That is the only comparison I can think of for having to describe absolutely zero action for the length of an entire episode of EastEnders. No thanks. He also predicted that Sheffield Wednesday would be top of the league, and he's bang right. Sheffield Wednesday, as we release this episode, are top of League One and looking set to return to the Championship. And who knows, maybe they will be back in the Premier League at some point in the future. I, for one, would welcome a return to Hillsborough. We may see Sheffield Wednesday in the top flight before too long. Thank you to everybody who listened to last week's show, 1993-94, with Masai and Stevie. There is a result for the greatest Antiguan and Barbudan player. It is a dead heat between Mikael Ledgerwood and Dexter Blackstock. They jointly head into the When Football Began Again Premier League Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, Moses Ashikodi did not make it in. Three's a crowd, Moses. Sorry about that, mate. So the eagle-eared of you will have noticed that we pretty much gave away who next week's guest is. Joe mentioned the Paulo Di Canio incident in his choices. We will be speaking to a man a little bit closer to the action even than Joe was. Danny Wilson, the manager that day, who watched his player get sent off and trudge off the pitch, never to wear a Sheffield Wednesday shirt again. He speaks really honestly about how that impacted him, his prospects as Sheffield Wednesday manager. Who knows, that could have been a real turning point in his career as well. He's a lovely man, talks really openly and honestly about everything, including taking Barnsley up to the Premier League and the top flight for the first time in their history as well. A fascinating chat with Danny Wilson. That is coming next week. And if you're new here, if this is your first episode, firstly, thank you for finding us. Secondly, thank you to whoever sent you here, if that is how you reached us. We have a different theme each week on the show. We do season reviews. We've done 92-93 and 93-94. We do interviews with players and managers. Danny Wilson coming up next week. Brian Dean was on the show a few weeks ago, and a fascinating chat that was as well. We do deserted island matches like the one you've just watched or listened to, and we have a countdown of the all-time Premier League table. We've done 50th. Swindon Town's season in the top flight has been covered. Barnsley are 49th. They are coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Please, if you've enjoyed the show, like, subscribe, leave a comment, do all of the things that you have to do these days to get seen by anything. I will put all of my efforts into booking fantastic guests and making the shows as interesting, informative, and funny as I possibly can. If you can help me by passing the pod and sharing it with people who you think will like it, that would be a huge, huge help. And hopefully we can create a community of people who just love retro football. Thank you if you are already doing that. I know lots of you are, and I really, really appreciate it. But that's it for this week. That was Joe Rawson's Deserted Island Matches. Join me next week for Extra Time with Danny Wilson. Meet you back here this time next week. Thanks for listening to When Football Began Again. Join us again next time for another slice of Premier League nostalgia. In the meantime, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, find us on socials, and spread the word with all your Premier League loving mates.